The pre-dawn darkness of November 1886 was pierced by the sound of wagon wheels crunching over frozen ground as Ezekiel Hartwell approached the imposing silhouette of the Colorado Territory Boys Industrial School. At 67 years old, Ezekiel had seen enough cruelty in his lifetime to recognize the signs of systematic abuse, and the urgent message he had received the night before suggested he was about to witness something that would test every moral principle he held dear. "Mr. Hartwell, thank God you came," whispered Sarah McKenna, the young kitchen worker who had risked her job to send word of what was planned for sunrise. "They've got 8 boys locked in the punishment shed, and Superintendent Crawford intends to make an example of them that the whole school will remember." Ezekiel felt his weathered hands clench around the reins as he absorbed the implications of Sarah's words. He had heard rumors about the harsh discipline at the industrial school, but had assumed they were exaggerated complaints from boys who simply didn't want to work. The reality he was learning was far worse than gossip had suggested. "What did these boys do that warrants public punishment?" Ezekiel asked, though he suspected the answer would reveal more about the adults in charge than about the children's actual crimes. Sarah's explanation came in hurried whispers as they approached the main building. 3 of them were caught sharing their breakfast with younger boys who were being punished with reduced rations. 2 others were found teaching the younger children to read during work hours. The remaining 3 tried to stop a beating and were charged with insubordination. The catalogue of crimes revealed everything Ezekiel needed to know about the moral atmosphere at the institution. These boys were being punished for showing compassion, sharing knowledge, and protecting the weak. Qualities that any decent society should encourage rather than suppress. "How many lashes are they planning to give?" Ezekiel asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. 25 each, Sarah replied, her voice breaking with distress. "In front of the whole school as a warning to anyone else who might be thinking of challenging the rules." Ezekiel calculated quickly in his head 200 lashes total to be administered to boys ranging in age from 10 to 15. It was a level of brutality that would be considered excessive for hardened criminals, let alone children whose only crimes were acts of kindness and courage. "Where are they being held?" Ezekiel asked, his mind already forming plans to intervene. Sarah led him around the main building to a small stone structure that served as the school's disciplinary facility. Through a barred window, Ezekiel could see the 8 boys huddled together in the darkness, their faces pale with fear and exhaustion from a sleepless night of waiting for dawn. "Boys," Ezekiel called softly through the window, "can you hear me?" 8 young faces turned toward the unexpected voice, hope flickering in eyes that had learned to expect only cruelty from adults. The oldest of the group, a boy of perhaps 15, with intelligent dark eyes, stepped closer to the window. "Who are you, sir?" the boy asked quietly. "Are you here to help us or just to watch?" The directness of the question, combined with the dignity in the boy's voice, despite his circumstances, impressed Ezekiel deeply. "I'm Ezekiel Hartwell, and I'm here because Miss McKenna told me what's planned for sunrise." "What's your name, son?" "James." "Sullivan, sir. These are my friends. Michael O'Brien, Patrick Kelly, Timothy Walsh, Daniel Murphy, Sean O'Connor, Kevin Brady, and little Tommy Flanagan." Each boy nodded as his name was called, their solidarity evident even in their fear. Ezekiel noted the Irish names and understood another layer of the prejudice these boys faced. Orphaned immigrants were often considered the lowest class of society, deserving harsh treatment simply because of their heritage and circumstances. "James, tell me what really happened. I want to hear your side of the story." James's explanation revealed the moral courage that had gotten the boys into trouble. "Sir, the younger children were being starved as punishment for crying during work. We shared our food because we couldn't watch them suffer. When the teachers found out, they said we were undermining proper discipline and the reading lessons. Little children shouldn't grow up ignorant just because they're orphans, replied Michael O'Brien, stepping forward despite his obvious fear. We were teaching them letters and numbers during our rest time, but Superintendent Crawford said education makes orphans think they're better than their station. The explanation revealed a systematic approach to keeping orphan children ignorant and dependent, ensuring they would accept whatever treatment society chose to give them. Ezekiel's anger crystallized into cold determination. "Boys, I want you to listen carefully," Ezekiel said through the window. "What you did, sharing food with hungry children, teaching knowledge to those who need it, protecting the weak, those aren't crimes. Those are the actions of decent human beings, and you should be proud of them." The simple validation of their moral instincts brought tears to several of the boys' eyes. They had been systematically taught that their compassion was weakness and their defiance was evil, but here was an adult who saw their actions differently. "Sir," whispered Tommy Flanagan, the youngest of the group, "are you going to help us? I don't think I can survive 25 lashes. I'm not very strong." Ezekiel's heart broke at the child's quiet terror, but his voice remained steady and reassuring. "Tommy, I give you my word that you will not be whipped this morning. None of you will." As the first grey light of dawn began to appear on the horizon, Ezekiel could hear activity stirring throughout the school. Superintendent Crawford and his staff were preparing for the public punishment that would serve as both entertainment and intimidation for the other students. "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah McKenna said urgently, "you need to leave now. If Superintendent Crawford finds you here, he'll have you arrested for trespassing. He has connections with the county sheriff." But Ezekiel had no intention of leaving. Instead, he positioned himself directly in front of the punishment shed's door, settling into a stance that made clear he wasn't moving voluntarily. The confrontation began when Superintendent Crawford emerged from the main building, followed by 3 assistants carrying whips and a crowd of frightened children who had been forced to witness the planned brutality. "What's the meaning of this?" Crawford demanded when he saw Ezekiel blocking access to the prisoners. "You're trespassing on school property, and I'll have you arrested if you don't move immediately." Crawford was a large man with the soft build of someone who used others to do his physical work, but his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who enjoyed having power over the helpless. His reputation for harsh discipline had made the industrial school a place parents threatened their children with, rather than a refuge for those who needed help. "I'm Ezekiel Hartwell," he replied calmly, "and I'm not moving until we discuss what you're planning to do to those boys." "Those boys are criminals who violated the rules of this institution," Crawford replied with obvious satisfaction. "They're going to receive the correction they've earned through their defiance and insubordination." Ezekiel's response came from deep moral conviction, shaped by decades of treating all people with basic dignity. "Mr. Crawford, I've spoken with these boys, and their crimes consist of feeding hungry children, teaching letters to the ignorant, and protecting the weak from abuse. If those are crimes in your system, then your system is evil." The public challenge to his authority in front of students and staff clearly infuriated Crawford, whose face flushed red with anger. "How dare you interfere with proper discipline? These orphans need harsh correction to prepare them for their place in society." "Their place in society," Ezekiel replied steadily, "should be determined by their character and abilities, not by their circumstances of birth or the cruelty of their childhood experiences." As the confrontation intensified, more of the school's staff gathered around, along with the entire population of students who had been forced to attend the planned punishment ceremony. Ezekiel realized that his actions were being witnessed by dozens of children who desperately needed to see at least one adult willing to stand up for what was right. "Mr. Crawford," Ezekiel announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, I'm formally challenging the legality of what you're planning to do. Whipping children for acts of compassion and education violates both territorial law and basic human decency." Crawford's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "You have no authority here, old man. These boys belong to the state, and the state has given me the authority to discipline them as I see fit. No child belongs to any adult in the way you're suggesting." Ezekiel replied firmly. "Children are human beings with rights and dignity, not property to be abused for the entertainment of their keepers." The philosophical debate was attracting attention from beyond the school grounds. Several townspeople had gathered to watch the unusual spectacle of someone challenging the superintendent's authority, and Ezekiel could see that his words were having an impact on both children and adults who had never heard such ideas expressed publicly. "Boys!" Ezekiel called out to the frightened students who had been forced to watch. "I want you to remember what you're seeing here today. Adults who use their power to hurt children are not worthy of respect or obedience. Real strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves." The message was clearly reaching its intended audience. Ezekiel could see hope flickering in the eyes of children who had learned to expect nothing but cruelty from the adults in their lives. "That's enough!" Crawford shouted, his composure finally cracking under the pressure of public challenge. "Sheriff Morrison, arrest this man for trespassing and interfering with lawful institutional operations." But Sheriff Morrison, who had been watching the confrontation with growing unease, seemed reluctant to arrest someone whose only crime was protecting children from excessive punishment. "Crawford, maybe we should discuss this situation before taking any drastic action." Ezekiel seized the opportunity to make his position clear to everyone present. "Sheriff, I'm not moving from this spot until I have guarantees that these 8 boys will not be subjected to brutal punishment for showing compassion to their fellow human beings." As the sun climbed higher on that November morning, the confrontation at the Colorado Territory Boys Industrial School had drawn a crowd that included not just school staff and students, but townspeople, county officials, and even a territorial inspector who had arrived to investigate reports of excessive discipline at the institution. Ezekiel Hartwell maintained his position in front of the punishment shed, his weathered frame serving as the only barrier between 8 terrified boys and the systematic brutality that Superintendent Crawford was determined to inflict. The moral weight of the moment was not lost on anyone present, especially the dozens of orphan children who were witnessing perhaps the first act of adult protection they had ever experienced. "Mr. Hartwell, you're forcing me to have you physically removed," Crawford declared, his authority challenged in ways that threatened the entire structure of fear-based control he had built at the school. "These boys must be punished according to institutional regulations, and your interference is undermining the discipline necessary to maintain order." Inspector William Davies, who had been observing the situation with growing concern, stepped forward with the authority of someone representing territorial oversight of institutional care. "Superintendent Crawford, perhaps we should review exactly what these boys did that warrants such severe punishment." Crawford's discomfort was evident as he faced questioning from someone with the power to investigate his methods. "Inspector Davies, these boys violated multiple regulations, unauthorized food distribution, conducting educational activities outside approved curriculum, and physical interference with staff disciplinary actions." "In other words," Ezekiel interjected, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, "they fed hungry children, taught reading to the ignorant, and tried to prevent abuse. Those sound like the actions of decent human beings, not criminals, deserving torture." The 8 boys inside the punishment shed had been listening to the debate about their fate with a mixture of terror and hope. James Sullivan, the oldest of the group, called out through the barred window with desperate courage. "Inspector Davies, sir, if you're here to see what really happens at this school, you should know that what we did yesterday happens every day. Children are starved, beaten, and kept ignorant because the staff says that's what orphans deserve." Timothy Walsh, despite his youth, added his voice to the testimony. "Sir, they tell us we're worthless because our parents died, that we should be grateful for whatever treatment we receive because nobody else wants us." The children's direct testimony created a powerful moment that exposed the systematic dehumanization that passed for education at the institution. Inspector Davies took careful notes, while the gathered townspeople absorbed first-hand accounts of institutional cruelty they had preferred not to examine too closely. Superintendent Crawford, Inspector Davies said firmly, "I'm suspending any corporal punishment pending a full investigation of conditions at this facility. These boys will remain in protective custody until we can determine appropriate responses to their actions." Crawford's face went white with rage at having his authority challenged by territorial oversight. "Inspector, you're undermining years of carefully structured discipline. These orphans will interpret lenient treatment as permission to violate any rule they choose." "Perhaps," Ezekiel suggested with quiet steel in his voice, "the problem isn't that the boys are violating rules, but that the rules themselves are designed to crush basic human decency out of children who should be encouraged to show compassion and courage." Dr. Margaret Sinclair, a child welfare advocate who had arrived from Denver after receiving reports about conditions at the school, stepped forward with documentation that supported Ezekiel's position. "Gentlemen, I've been investigating institutional care throughout the territory, and I have sworn affidavits from former staff members documenting systematic abuse at this facility. What Mr. Hartwell is preventing isn't discipline. It's torture disguised as moral education." The revelation that federal investigators had been documenting abuses transformed the legal and political landscape of the confrontation. Suddenly, Crawford and his supporters found themselves potentially complicit in criminal conduct, rather than simply enforcing institutional discipline. "The boys inside that shed," Dr. Sinclair continued, consulting her official documents, "represent exactly the kind of moral leadership that healthy communities should cultivate. They saw injustice and responded with courage and compassion, yet they're being punished as if those qualities were criminal." Sheriff Morrison, who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with his role in the situation, made a decision that reflected both legal prudence and moral clarity. "Superintendent Crawford, in light of the ongoing investigation, I'm placing these boys in Mr. Hartwell's protective custody pending resolution of the federal inquiry." The decision represented a complete reversal of the power dynamics that had governed the school for years. Instead of facing brutal punishment for their compassion, the 8 boys were being protected by the same adult who had risked arrest to defend them. "Sheriff Morrison, you don't have the authority to override institutional custody arrangements," Crawford protested desperately. "These boys are legally committed to this school until they reach 16 years of age. Federal investigators have different opinions about institutional custody when it involves systematic abuse," Dr. Sinclair replied, producing additional legal documents. "Mr. Hartwell's intervention has potentially saved these children from treatment that violates territorial and federal laws protecting minors." As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate crisis passed, Ezekiel finally moved away from the punishment shed door to speak directly with the 8 boys who had been the focus of so much adult conflict. "Boys, you're safe now," he said through the window with infinite gentleness. "The whipping that was planned will never happen, and you're going to come home with me until proper arrangements can be made for your care." The transformation in the boys' faces was immediate and profound. Children who had spent the night expecting Torture were suddenly faced with the possibility of protection and kindness from an adult who had proven his commitment to their welfare. "Mr. Hartwell," James Sullivan said with tears in his voice, "why did you risk so much for boys you don't even know? Most adults think orphans like us aren't worth the trouble." Ezekiel's response revealed the moral philosophy that had guided his entire intervention. "James, every child deserves to have at least one adult who believes they're worth protecting. What you boys did, standing up for the weak, sharing with the hungry, teaching the ignorant, those are the actions of heroes, not criminals." As the legal arrangements for the boys' release were being completed, Ezekiel found himself surrounded by other students from the school who had witnessed his stand against institutional authority. "Mister," whispered a young girl who couldn't have been more than 9 years old, "does what you did mean that adults can't hurt children just because they want to?" The question revealed the profound impact of Ezekiel's intervention on children who had never seen an adult choose protection over punishment. His answer carried hope to dozens of young people who desperately needed to believe that the world could be better than their experience had taught them. "It means," Ezekiel said gently, "that there are adults who believe children deserve kindness and respect, and that we'll fight to make sure you receive the treatment you deserve." When the 8 boys finally emerged from the punishment shed, their relief and gratitude were overwhelming. They had entered that stone building expecting torture and emerged to find themselves under the protection of someone who valued their moral courage rather than punishing it. "Mr. Hartwell," Michael O'Brien said as they climbed into Ezekiel's wagon, "what you did this morning changed everything for us. We were ready to die rather than watch our friends suffer alone." "And now you don't have to," Ezekiel replied simply. "You're going to learn what it means to be valued for the good people you already are." As they drove away from the industrial school toward Ezekiel's ranch, the 8 boys began to understand that their nightmare was ending and their real lives were finally beginning. Behind them, a system of institutional cruelty was collapsing under the weight of public scrutiny that one man's courage had brought to bear. "Boys," Ezekiel said as his ranch came into view, "I want you to know that what awaits you isn't just safety, but the chance to prove that children raised with respect and kindness become the kind of adults that make the world better." How will the 8 boys adapt to life with dignity and respect? What challenges will they face as they heal from years of institutional abuse? Subscribe to our channel to witness the incredible transformation of boys society had written off as worthless into young men of character and courage. The spring of 1887 brought unprecedented attention to Ezekiel Hartwell's ranch, where the 8 boys he had rescued from brutal punishment had not only thrived, but had become symbols of what orphaned children could achieve when treated with dignity and respect rather than systematic cruelty. James Sullivan, now 16 and grown strong under Ezekiel's guidance, had developed into a natural leader whose intelligence and moral courage impressed every adult who met him. Michael O'Brien had discovered a gift for working with horses that rivaled any professional trainer, while Patrick Kelly's mechanical aptitude had led to innovations in ranch equipment that increased efficiency and safety. "These boys have exceeded every expectation," observed Dr. Margaret Sinclair, who had been documenting their progress as part of her broader investigation into child welfare reform. 6 months ago, they were scheduled to be whipped for showing compassion. Now they're examples of what institutionalized children can become under proper care. Ezekiel watched with deep satisfaction as Timothy Walsh helped younger ranch hands with reading lessons, using the same teaching methods that had gotten him in trouble at the industrial school. The boy who had been punished for sharing knowledge was now recognized as one of the most patient and effective educators in the territory. "Mr. Hartwell," Timothy said one evening as they reviewed plans for expanding their educational programs. "Sometimes I can't believe that showing kindness to hungry children almost got us killed. It seems so obvious now that helping others was the right thing to do." The transformation in all 8 boys had been remarkable, but it was their collective impact on the community that truly vindicated Ezekiel's intervention. Word of their success had spread throughout the territory, inspiring changes in how institutions treated orphaned children and challenging long-held assumptions about the nature and potential of society's most vulnerable members. "Your boys have started something bigger than any of us anticipated," Inspector William Davies told Ezekiel during one of his regular visits to monitor their progress. "The territorial legislature is drafting new laws governing institutional childcare based largely on what you've proven possible, but success had also brought challenges. The publicity surrounding their story had attracted attention from those who viewed their achievements as threats to established social order." Superintendent Crawford, now under federal investigation for institutional abuse, had launched a campaign to discredit their accomplishments. "Mr. Hartwell has created unrealistic expectations about what society owes to orphaned children," Crawford had written in letters to territorial officials. "His coddling methods produce young people who think they deserve the same opportunities as legitimate children, which undermines proper social hierarchy." The criticism revealed the fundamental philosophical divide between those who believed orphans should be grateful for whatever treatment they received, and those who insisted that all children deserved opportunities to develop their full potential, regardless of their circumstances. The test of the boys' character came when they were invited to testify before a territorial commission investigating institutional childcare throughout the West. Their testimony would influence policies affecting thousands of orphaned children, but it also meant confronting the officials and philosophies that had nearly destroyed them. "We don't have to do this," Ezekiel assured them, as they prepared for the journey to the territorial capital. "You've already proven everything that needs proving just by becoming the fine young men you are." James Sullivan's response revealed the moral courage that had gotten him in trouble at the industrial school and had been strengthened under Ezekiel's mentorship. "Mr. Hartwell, we survived that place, so we could speak for children who are still trapped there. If our words can help even one child avoid what we experienced, then we have to testify." The hearing that followed became a watershed moment in territorial child welfare policy. The 8 boys, now confident young men with bright futures, testified about their experiences with both institutional cruelty and the transformative power of respectful treatment. "Honorable Commissioners," James Sullivan said, speaking for the group with the eloquence that had developed under Ezekiel's guidance, "we want you to understand that children don't need to be broken to become useful. We needed to be valued, educated, and trusted to make good choices." Michael O'Brien added his own testimony about the difference between discipline and abuse. "At the industrial school, punishment was used to destroy our spirits and make us accept that we deserved whatever treatment society chose to give us. With Mr. Hartwell, correction comes through understanding why something is wrong and learning better ways to handle similar situations." The commissioners, many of whom had never heard orphaned children speak about their experiences with such intelligence and dignity, were clearly moved by testimony that challenged fundamental assumptions about institutional childcare. "Young men," said Commissioner Robert Hayes, "your achievements under Mr. Hartwell's care suggest that previous approaches to orphan management may have been counterproductive. What would you recommend for improving conditions at institutions throughout the territory?" Timothy Walsh's answer revealed the wisdom that had been cultivated through months of thoughtful discussion and moral education. So treat orphaned children like human beings with potential rather than problems to be managed. Give us education, responsibility, and the chance to prove what we can become when adults believe in us. The impact of their testimony was immediate and far-reaching. Within months, the territorial legislature had passed comprehensive child welfare reforms that established minimum standards for institutional care, required educational opportunities for all orphan children, and created oversight mechanisms to prevent the kind of systematic abuse the boys had endured. What U8 accomplished in that hearing room changed the lives of thousands of children, Dr. Sinclair told them during a celebration at Ezekiel's ranch. Your courage in speaking truth about both cruelty and kindness will influence child welfare policies for generations, but perhaps the most significant measure of their transformation came when they were asked to help establish a new model institution for orphaned children, one based on respect, education, and preparation for productive citizenship rather than on punishment and submission. The Hartwell Home for Boys, as it came to be known, was designed and operated according to principles the 8 boys had learned through their own recovery from institutional trauma. Children were treated as individuals with unique talents and needs. Education was emphasized over punishment, and moral development was encouraged through example rather than fear. We're not trying to create perfect children, James Sullivan explained to visitors who came to observe the innovative program. We're trying to help children become the best versions of themselves by showing them that adults can be trusted to act in their best interests. As the boys approached their 18th birthdays and prepared to leave Ezekiel's direct care, each had developed clear plans for contributing to their community and helping other young people who faced similar challenges. Mr. Hartwell, Sean O'Connor said during their final group meeting, "When you stood in front of that punishment shed door, you didn't just save 8 boys from a whipping. You proved that one person's courage can change an entire system if they're willing to stand for what's right." Ezekiel's response came from the heart of a man who had discovered that protecting others was the most meaningful work of his life. Boys, you saved yourselves by refusing to let cruelty destroy your capacity for compassion and courage. I just provided the opportunity for your true characters to emerge. The graduation ceremony that marked their transition to independence was attended by territorial officials, child welfare advocates, and dozens of other young people whose lives had been improved by the reforms their courage had inspired. Ladies and gentlemen, Ezekiel addressed the gathered crowd, these 8 young men represent proof that society's judgments about human worth are often completely wrong. They were condemned as worthless and subjected to treatment designed to break their spirits, yet they emerged as leaders whose moral courage has changed how our territory treats its most vulnerable children. As the ceremony concluded and the young men prepared to begin their adult lives, they understood that their experiences had created obligations as well as opportunities. They had survived systematic cruelty and thrived under respectful treatment, and now they carried the responsibility of ensuring that other children would have similar chances for redemption and growth. "We'll never forget what you taught us," Daniel Murphy said, as they prepared to leave the ranch that had become their true home. That every child deserves at least one adult who believes they're worth protecting, and that courage is contagious when someone is willing to demonstrate it. Years later, when historians wrote about the child welfare reforms that transformed the American West, they would trace their origins to a November morning when an old rancher stood in front of a punishment shed and refused to move until justice was served. The 8 boys he protected became leaders, educators, and advocates whose influence extended far beyond their own rescued lives. From scheduled victims to territorial heroes, the 8 boys proved that moral courage can overcome any obstacle when supported by adult protection and respect. Ezekiel's stand against systematic cruelty shows how one person's refusal to accept injustice can transform entire systems and save countless lives. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of adults who risk everything to protect children and the incredible power of treating every child as worthy of dignity and unlimited potential.